to today's discussion of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's ninth power plan. If you could go to the next slide. If you're not familiar with World Resources Institute, we are a global research-based, nonpartisan nonprofit organization that is working to improve people's lives, protect nature, and halt climate change. We have a team of over 2,200 staff in 13 offices around the world, working on topics like energy, water, forests, cities, food, transportation, kind of really running the gamut of sustainability related topics. I'm Kelly Leffler, Senior Manager for Grid Decarbonization and Markets in the U.S. Energy Program of our Polsky Center for the Global Energy Transition. If you could go to the next slide. So the Pacific Northwest, as you all are very well aware, is seeing a number of factors that deeply impact energy system planning, from region-wide extreme weather, wildfire risk, changing resource mix, changing resource availability, load growth, and more. And all of that is affecting the ever-rising costs of energy. Utilities, public utility commissioners, state policymakers, and others are making really important decisions based on things like integrated resource planning, resource procurements, technical workshops that affect the reliability, resilience, affordability, but also of the electricity sector, as well as economic growth, access to clean energy, equity, health, and safety. So local governments clearly have a stake in these decisions that are being made. So WRI has a variety of work streams that support local governments engaging in some of these decision-making processes in the electricity sector. That includes a webinar series that I think my colleagues will drop a link to in the chat. But we wanted to take some time to explore an opportunity that is unique to the Pacific Northwest. If you could go to the next slide. And that is the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's power plan. The ninth power plan is in development right now. So we have a representative from the council here who will talk about what the council is, the plan, and the ninth plan specifically. And then we'll talk to two regional experts about the impact of the plan and engaging in the development process. If you could go to the next slide. So joining us today, we have Jennifer Light, who has been the Director of Power Planning at the Northwest Power and Conservation Council since 2022. She leads a team of power system analysts, coordinates with regional partners across the Pacific Northwest, and oversees the council's multi-year power planning cycles. She joined the council in 2014 as manager of the Regional Technical Forum, which is an advisory committee to the council that develops and maintains a list of eligible energy efficiency resources in the Northwest. Prior to the council, she was a senior program manager at the Consortium for Energy Efficiency, where she launched CEE's Emerging Technologies project, and previously supported natural gas space heating efforts. She's also worked as a project manager for state and federal agencies. Jen holds a BA in geology from Macalester College and an MPA in environmental science and policy from Columbia University. We're also joined by Jason Eisdorfer. He's an advisor at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. Since arriving at PNNL in 2022, Jason has advised on a wide range of projects that include regional planning, grid modernization, state technical assistance, and modernizing utility regulation. Prior to PNNL, Jason was an independent consultant representing clients including state and municipal governments, national and regional energy and environmental NGOs, an international offshore wind developer, and an international regulatory consultant. Jason has also served as Oregon Public Utility Commission's Utility Program Director. He served as GHD Policy Advisor to the Bonneville Power Administration, and has served as Legal Counsel and Energy Program Director of the Citizens Utility Board of Oregon. Jason has co-authored legislation related to electric utility operations and climate change. He served on the Board of Energy Trust of Oregon for 12 years and has served on the board of the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. He's also an adjunct professor of law at both the University of Oregon and Lewis and Clark law schools, teaching classes on climate change, policy, energy utility regulation, and energy industry transitions. Fun fact we learned earlier, he actually taught Ben Otto. Jason received his law degree from University of Oregon Law School and received his BA from the University of Chicago. Last but not least, we have Ben Otto, who's a senior policy associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition. He's based in Boise, and Ben has represented state-based nonprofit groups in utility planning and regulatory proceedings in Idaho for 17 years. His work has focused on policy, programs, and regulatory structures that promote efficient, flexible customers powered by clean energy, interconnected through a robust transmission grid. During his time, he served on the board of directors at several Northwest-based groups, including Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, the Idaho Clean Energy Association, and the Northwest Energy Coalition. He's currently the vice chair of the Renewable Northwest board, and he holds a Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School and a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School. When he's not working towards clean, affordable, and reliable energy future, he enjoys spending time in the mountains and the deserts of the Intermountain West. Without further ado, next slide. We will jump into Jen's presentation on an overview of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and a couple of notes. We will have a few poll questions popping up throughout the presentation. Also, because we really do want this to be a little bit more of a discussion, we are using the sort of meeting functionality rather than a webinar format. So please do drop your questions in the chat function, and just try to make sure that you stay muted so we can all hear our speakers. All right, Jen, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction and the time today to talk about our plan that we're working on here. Next slide, please. So as Kelly mentioned, I'll give a little bit of background about the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, what we are and what our responsibilities are under the Northwest Power Act. And then I'll spend most of the time about our power plan development process so far. What are we thinking about? What's our timeline? What's the process? And talk at the end a little bit about engagement of what we do. Next slide, please. So the Northwest Power and Conservation Council was created out of the Northwest Power Act of 1980, which authorized the states of Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington to create the council. The council itself is 8 members, 2 from each of those 4 states appointed by their governors. And then the members are supported by central staff, including myself, as well as state policy staff that sit in each of the states supporting the members directly. The council meets at least once a month in public meetings, although at times we do have more frequent meetings than that, depending on the workload. And if you can go to the next slide, I just wanted to include in here our current council members that we are working with. So we have Mike Milburn is our chair from Montana. His partner in crime is Doug Grob as well in Washington there. Les Purse is the vice chair of the council right now, and working with Casey Golden. Down here on the right in Oregon, you can see Chuck Sams and Margie Hoffman joined the council fairly recently, our newest members, great addition. And then in Idaho, Ed Schriever and Jeff Allen. So this is who makes up the council itself. Whenever I'm talking about the council, this is the council. Next slide, please. So what are our responsibilities here under the Power Act? We were created to develop a regional power plan and a fish and wildlife program that addresses both environmental issues and energy needs. We have kind of 3 main tenets if we think about our work. Ensuring an adequate, efficient, economical, and reliable power supply. Those are words coming right out of the Power Act, and it's something we're striving to do through both of our fish and wildlife program and power planning activities. We also have to protect, mitigate, and enhance for the fish and wildlife resources impacted by the hydro system and conduct our work through an open and public process. And if you think about the time when the Power Act was created, you can see how these tenets are kind of reflecting back to the issues of the day. We had a problem in this region with load forecasting going up, 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 developing resources or investing in resources that ultimately weren't needed and resulting in significant cost impact on the ratepayers. At the same time, there was a concern about the impacts of the fish runs in the hydro system and concerns that all of these decisions were being made behind closed doors. And so they created this entity to think about all these pieces together, to do long-term load planning, long-term resource planning, thinking about how to do it in the most economical way while balancing these other considerations, and also thinking about the fish and wildlife process and doing it all in public. So that is the core of who the council is. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we're doing our work with anything here at the council, we're very much directed by the Northwest Power Act. And what it's telling us on the power planning side is first we have to prepare a regional conservation and electric power plan. So the region to us is the Columbia River Basin, essentially. Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and the western part of Montana that flows into the Columbia Basin. In our planning, we're supposed to give priority to cost-effective resources. That was also coming straight out of the time when there was a lot of investment in potential nuclear projects that we were seeing lots of cost overruns and resulted in kind of big uh, big kind of cost burden on the region. So prioritizing really this cost effectiveness, but within that, it set priority for conservation or energy efficiency, as we often talk about it here. Then after conservation, renewables, and then kind of other resources down the line. But the Act really set up this concept of energy efficiency as a resource and trying to promote conservation, energy efficiency, and renewables for the region, but making sure we do it in a cost-effective way. In the plan, we need to include a scheme for implementing conservation measures and developing resources to reduce or meet the administrator's obligation. So this starts to get to the council's connection to the Bonneville Power Administration, where it was really teed up to guide resource acquisition by the Bonneville Power Administration, and their decisions around resource acquisition need to be consistent with the council's power planning. And when they're talking about the obligation, it's not just the obligation for loads, although that's a very important part of it, but any other obligations that the administrator has, including the obligations to implement the council's fish and wildlife program as part of their responsibilities under the Power Act. In developing this plan, the Act also requires that we give due consideration, and that's the terminology, to environmental quality, compatibility with the existing system. So a lot of thought of what is already in the ground and how do we build new resources, which is really our focus, new resources that are compatible with that system. It talks about the council's fish and wildlife program that ultimately becomes part of our power plan, and then other criteria that the council might set forth. So this is a high level guidance given to us on what we're supposed to do in our power planning. Next slide, please. So the council's started development of its ninth power plan. We formally kicked off a review of this plan in February of last year, so just about a year ago. And it focuses on the electric system. It provides a 20-year perspective, but we tend to do within all of our power plans a near-term focus or an action plan period, which will be kind of a 6-year perspective. So this plan is looking at 2027 through 2046, and then a near-term focus on 2027 through 2032. We're going to put forward a resource strategy and supporting recommendations to meet the region's needs while managing both costs and risks of the system. And the recommendations will be for the region, but there is that particular focus on Bonneville because of their connection to us through the Power Act. Next slide, please. A little bit more on the recommendations in the plan, and we'll kind of build this out. At the heart of it are these resource recommendations to Bonneville. Every power plan includes within it recommendations for new resource additions needed for the region. And the ninth power plan will include specific recommendations for resources for Bonneville in order to meet or reduce its obligation. And these recommendations have the strongest legal meaning. If you look back at the history of the council's power plans, the main resource that has been recommended over many years that has this real direct connection to Bonneville has been conservation. And Bonneville's conservation program, working with its customer utilities, have really been implementing the conservation laid out in the power plan. This specific plan might need to look beyond that as Bonneville's looking at its contracts for post 2028 delivery and might need to acquire some additional resources on the supply side. And so we'll be thinking about that in potential recommendations as we're thinking about what resources does Bonneville need to meet its obligation. If you can click again, then we get to resource recommendations for the region. When the Power Act was set, there was this idea that maybe Bonneville would be the acquirer of resources for everyone going forward. Well, we know that's not the case. Many other entities, including Bonneville customers, are acquiring their own resources. And so we do put forward a plan for what the region as a whole needs, not just Bonneville, but what are the other resources that we need in the region. And we do that both in types of resources and the amounts. This will guide decision making, but there isn't the same legal connection as there is with Bonneville. So we really see our plan in helping to guide decisions, guide policy, and more of a guidance document, less of that legal connection there. And then surrounding this, if you click one more time, we have additional supporting recommendations. These can be directed at Bonneville, they can be directed at utilities, states, local agencies, and others. And they can focus on addressing specific challenges that might be needed to overcome in order to do the resources that we have recommended. These two guide decision making, again, no legal hook, but they're really important guidance in trying to make sure that we build these resources to ensure that adequate system. In the past, we've had recommendations that are around thinking about siting of resources or thinking about how we plan for transmission, different things like that that might not be specific to a resource, but are helping to kind of overcome a potential hurdle in meeting the objectives laid out. Next slide, Pete, please. So just a really quick one on our timeline, and then I'll get more into some of the key issues. We officially kicked this off in February, but February of last year, but we actually started the process a whole year prior, where we released an issue paper to the region saying, what's on your mind? What are your concerns for new resource development in the region? And that solicited a lot of great ideas through a public comment process that we ultimately did incorporate into our scope. We are in the middle today of doing scenario modeling, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we're getting close to the place where we're ready to have our draft results to share with the council and with everybody else who's calling in and listening, and starting to prepare our draft plan. We're currently targeting releasing a draft power plan in July, which then will open a public comment period. And then we'll take in those comments and work to have a final one in November. I put these little fishes on here too, because the timing of our power plan very much is connected to the Council's Fish and Wildlife Program amendment process per the Power Act. Before we can start review of our plan, we first need to kick off the Fish and Wildlife Amendment process. That was done in January of last year through a call for recommendations into that process, which is why we then started in February. And then the second fish that's kind of sitting under May of this year, they're hoping to have their final Fish and Wildlife program, which then we use the information from that, particularly information around hydro operations for fish and wildlife, as an underpinning in our resource strategy planning for our plan. Next slide, please. So key topics for the plan, and maybe you can click a few times on this one, two more. Sorry about the animation. We'll stop there. Okay, so Kelly actually teed these up perfectly because the issues the region's facing very much came through in that uh, document that we put out in the call for comments and are issues that we're grappling with in this plan. First one on this list here, although these aren't in any particular order of priority, but the first one is extreme weather. Uh, We've seen a lot of extreme weather events in the Northwest recently, and there's a lot of interest in making sure that any planning we're doing going forward accounts for extreme events. Events very similar to what we've had, maybe even bigger, maybe more frequent. How are we doing that? That's been a big concern on folks' minds. The second one is around load growth uncertainty. We've seen a lot of new large loads coming into the region, and I think that's driven some real concerns about how do we address this load growth in the near term, but also as we're seeing electrification of end uses, whether it's transportation or buildings, that load coming on, how do we manage for that? And if you can click once here, both of these is something that we're dealing with under what we would call our futures approach. So we have thousands of pathways that we've created that underlie our analysis for every single run we do that capture the uncertainty around load growth, capture uncertainty around hydro conditions. So the river doesn't run the same every year. So how do we account for that? Renewable profiles, particularly wind and solar profiles, the shape of those. All of those are informed by climate model data. We use three different climate models to project forward future temperatures, precipitation patterns, all of that to capture sort of the shifting climate and how that might play out, both in terms of loads as temperatures shift, maybe warmer in the summer and cooler, warmer in the winter as well. So it kind of shifts that profile, but also how the precipitation's coming down and turning into stream flow, how weather and the wind profiles kind of correlate to temperature. So we have this climate model data underlying that, and we've checked to make sure that uh, it captures extreme events, both similar to the ones we've had in the past, but also maybe more significant and more frequent. So that is sitting on our analysis. Also in our futures, just worth noting, we have uncertainty around future natural gas prices and volatility around those prices. So price excursions that could come from different types of events that might happen. Uh, so the next set of stuff is around sort of our resource options a little bit. So new resource and transmission risk was one of the big areas we heard a lot of concern about. Supply chain challenges. What if we're struggling to build resources? What if we are having challenge building the transmission we need to get the resources to load? What if the costs go up significantly? All of these types of questions are ones that are on our members' minds and on the minds of many that are engaged in our process, and something we want to make sure that we addressed in this plan. And then this last one here, changing hydro operations. If you think about our connection to the Fish and Wildlife Program, but also just the importance of hydropower in the region as the backbone for our power system, understanding the implications of if the hydro operations change, including potentially limiting the flexibility of hydro to support fish, then what would that mean for new resource additions? And if you can please click one more time for this slide. This we're dealing with through what we would call scenario analysis. So we have 13 different sensitivities where we're changing assumptions around resource cost and availability, around transmission availability, around hydro conditions, and we're going to look at the differences in those results to provide insights on planning for these risks. So, for example, we have three sensitivities that the one thing changing is the amount of transmission in the region. One that's just the existing transmission, things under construction today or in the ground. One that includes some additional transmission, really guided by some of the work in the West Tech 10-year study. And then a third one that includes even more transmission. And so we'll see then in our modeling what resources are we using to meet future load growth, given all this uncertainty we talk about on the left side of this screen? And how does that change with these different transmission buildouts? That will help us develop a strategy that's robust. And if we are concerned about the risk of new transmission, what resources might we build to kind of help mitigate that risk in the near term? So that's just one example of the type of thing that we'll be looking at through our scenario modeling. Next slide, please. I talked about a lot of the ranges of uncertainty that sit under our futures, but the only one I wanted to really include here was our load forecast, because this is one that gets a lot of questions right now in particular. We have sitting underneath our load forecast a basic assumption of economic growth, and we have two different pathways for that. We also have some building electrification and two pathways for that, one where there's more in the future in Washington and Oregon. But the three big ones that we add on top are tech loads, data center, or other high tech, transportation, and hydrogen. I think you could also think about this as electrification of industrial uses where there's some flexibility. And for each of these, we develop multiple forecasts. So for the tech loads, this range is represented by the low to our high forecast, and there's a line in there that gives you kind of the medium forecast. It's not quite in the middle, but it's getting you there. Our transportation, we also have a low and a high. Both of those meet state goals for transportation, but some just have kind of less turnover of vehicles kind of getting there. And then again, a low and a high hydrogen. And you can see these loads get very, very large. The tech loads being a nearer term risk, transportation being a longer term risk, very peaky load too that we have to manage, and then hydrogen being more uncertain, but useful for kind of looking at that greening of industrial loads. On the right is our final demand forecast, both in terms of energy and peak. And it's showing the range because we have a range of trajectories in there that kind of mix and match our different loads. But even on the low end, we're still getting very significant load growth for the region. And on the high end, we're doubling both in terms of energy and capacity. So these are the types of loads we're trying to plan for and manage for in this power plan. Next slide. So here we are in our power plan process. This is the overall flow. I won't walk through it other than to say anything in gray we've kind of checked off. The ones in color are still things that are in motion. The Fish and Wildlife Program is currently undergoing a public comment process. We are in our scenario analysis stage for what are those resources and reserves we need. And then once we get those results, we'll get into the strategy development and the drafting of the plan. Next slide, please. So a little bit more in development, and I should have added to this slide, draft subject to change. Our timelines always are, but this is what we're working towards. We're hoping to wrap up our modeling this month, maybe a little bit early into next month, starting to share the results with the council in March. We'll do that at one of our council meetings, which is open to the public. So anyone's able to listen in. We'll continue that discussion with them through April. And then in May, we're going to try to transition towards preparing the draft plan based on all the information we got from all of our modeling. What do we want to recommend to the region? What do we want to recommend to Bonneville in terms of resources? And what are those supporting recommendations that sit around it that we think are important to put forward? We're targeting a release of the draft in July. This will start a public comment period. We were planning to do a 60-day public comment period that will kick off. As part of that public comment period, we'll hold at least one public hearing in each state, and one that will be virtual too, that anyone can call in. If we follow something similar to what the Fish and Wildlife Program has done with theirs, probably a couple hearings in each state. And then once that concludes and we have all the public comment, we'll assess kind of what we've heard from that and work to finalize a plan currently targeting November. Next slide, please. So with that, again, we meet monthly. I've put a little picture to our meeting page. If you kind of click on that, you can see all of our meetings, both our council meetings themselves sit in here, as well as advisory committees that are groups of more technical folks or different experts who are helping to advise our work. Those too are also open to the public and available. We put kind of minutes from them for the council meetings. We also post videos of the presentations, and then we'll have that public comment period. But these are all the ways to get involved. And with that, I'll stop there, Kelly, and see if there are any questions I can answer. I wanted to leave some time for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. So yeah, if you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. And while we wait to see if folks have any questions, maybe one question for you, Jen. So when it comes to you mentioned in the forecast, for instance, around electrification of transportation, some of those state policies that are factored into to the projections. How are local policies or goals or commitments related to electrification or decarbonization reflected in the modeling?
That's a fantastic question. It's something we are trying to kind of build from the ground up, where we have a local policy. We try to understand what that is, what that's trying to represent, how that might sit under a state goal or policy, and then if there are kind of a regional look in policies. So some of the early work we did in the plan was map out what are all the policies out there and what are they leading to in terms of whether it be a load growth factor, like because of electrification, or maybe it's a policy around clean resources. And we'll set an overall target that's trying to capture that full layer of policies. I'd say we do a very good job of capturing state level policies and some of the larger municipalities where we know those goals and targets and how to do it. We may not perfectly capture some of the other ones, but I think they're often covered by some of the broader utility or state goals that are out there. For example, even in states like Idaho, where there might not be a state policy, Idaho Power has a clean policy that they're working towards. So we try to reflect that. And we do this west-wide, but we spend the most time focusing on the region policies.
Um, And then, so you mentioned a few different ways that folks can kind of participate in the process for developing the plan. How are comments or feedback received through kind of each of those venues, those mechanisms, whether it's the monthly meetings, the advisory committees, or submitting comments on the draft plan? Kind of how does the council kind of consider those, adjudicate those?
We'll start with the advisory committee. So, whenever we're bringing something to the council, for almost everything has been brought through an advisory committee. So we'll present what we're thinking, and then we'll always present where was the advisory committee on that, including any dissenting opinions, and then have that for the council to kind of weigh where they want to go. We try to be very transparent in, is anyone disagreeing with where staff is? And they'll kind of talk through and give direction of where to go. At the monthly meetings, there's a public comment period at the end of every meeting. So anyone can sign up to make public comment, and that will be something we keep in the record and the council members will have in their heads as we're moving forward through our steps. I think there's also ways to just engage offline with council members and staff in other conversations that we tried to filter through. And then in the official comment period, all of those comments will go through in a public meeting together to talk about what were the comments, how do we recommend dealing with them as staff, where does staff want to, where does the council want to go with them, which ones, do they want to act in and shift in what we're doing versus which ones are they still comfortable with our direction but want to respond in some other way. So it really does, at the end of the day, take a balancing of where is the council at as a whole and how can we help give them the information to move forward and shift, and how is that supported by analysis that undersits it, because the council really does rely on the analysis that comes forward by staff or others.
Okay. Checking sort of last call for questions, if anyone has any for Jen. If not, Jen, thank you so much for coming to talk through the council, the plan, and kind of where things are in the ninth power plan. And we'll turn to our discussion portion.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Take care.